let's practice a little analysis before we get to how could you go from reading this text to creating an assignment for students, because we can't really create assignments until we have done that work of deep analysis ourselves. So, what are the aspects, the motifs, the elements of visual reading? Probably the most obvious is color, right? What sets text apart from image? Well, these are things that are full of color. How is color working in this scene here that we have from Excellence? And remember, we're using Excellence because that's the text that's free, that everyone can access. You should be doing this using the text that you chose to browse. You do not need to use Excellence. So, but how do we see color working Excellence? Well, here it's very distinctive, right? And that it's an absence of color. It's white spaces that are giving the space for the hero, and color is the background. How does that make you feel as you're viewing this image? Well, one, it's extremely bright. It draws the eye, right? And then let's think about line. Well, line, you could be the outline of the body, but there's also an implied line, right? A diagonal line created by the text box, which has that tension that we thought about earlier. Finally, let's think about framing. It's just a very brief overview. So this frame is really interesting because look at here, we have a frame that's internal to the main frame of the page. And in this internal frame, we have what appears to be a building and some kind of explosion. And then what's the main frame? It's our protagonist standing in the ruins of a building. What does framing do here? Well, framing kind of reverses the visual impact that this scene would have, say, if you were just filming it live action straight up, right? Because the impact on the building is minimalized, whereas the main frame is about the protagonist. It centers on that character. There's lots of diagonals. There's the diagonals of the destroyed building. Keep shooting up way too far. There's the diagonals of the impact, diagonals creating all of that tension. And that tension is resolved with the vertical of the hero. This hero's entire body, their sense, and everything is centered on that vertical. That is resolving that tension. What does that mean? Just as you can interpret language or rhythm or rhyme or style, you can interpret image in a graphic novel. And that's one of the things that makes it so appealing for resistant readers, is that it's sending messages in ways that are different from just a prose or a poetic text. It's sending implicit messages through image as well as through written word. So, what is the image saying here? One, it is framing the hero as heroic, right? The hero is the center, the hero is the vertical resolving focal point. Chaos is resolved by that vertical. The other thing, what's going on? Well, look at that expression. What is it? It's intense, it's aggressive, it's powerful, all the things you want in a hero. All these things are being conveyed visually. And then, like, what's this along the edges? We have things like pi that we recognize, along with symbols that we do not. What does that mean? Well, that is where we're getting into the fantastic, right? That's the implicitly the magic, the power that the hero is wielding. Interpreting all of these things, understanding these, even understanding these as you're browsing sort of on the fly is why this can work for readers who perhaps are not influenced or inspired the same by just text alone. It's a really important thing to think about, as our earlier TED Talks addressed, that this is going to get readers in a different way. So how do we go from we've analyzed that this has meaning, that this is significant, to what we can do with our students? Here I have a potential library activity. It includes the materials and the steps, and it's about, first of all, how do you engage students with this text? You gotta like reading challenges and stuff, but then the action of writing themselves into these narratives is something that was really important in the TED Talks that we listened to. So here's a way that you could enable that and validate that in something like a library summer reading, or even in a school library setting, where you're having students read a novel, graphic novel, then read and engage with how to use those skills, those approaches, and then finally doing that and writing themselves into a story. Which is something that, if we go back to the very first week of classes, we were seeing in Milo Imagines the World, and in a sense in Journey as well. Which is the importance of the child viewer in writing their own narrative, writing themselves into the narrative that they want. And so this is a way to enable that in, getting, say, graphic novel frames, blank frames, and then teaching students how to draw themselves into that space. So this is an example of how do we do a close reading, and then how do we move from close reading to an assignment. And then we're going to be moving on to our discussion question.